Hi guys, so some of you that have been following the channel might know that I have recently opened a bar with some friends up in Northcote in Melbourne. It's called Goodwater, and we have a pretty impressive American whiskey selection. And really the driving force behind this whole thing coming to fruition is this guy right here, Nathaniel White. Thank you.
Hello.
So Nate actually had a pretty incredible American whiskey collection before we even opened this. So it's a lot of his kind of personal bottles that have ended up on the back bar that he was collecting. So I'm sure April's pretty happy that they're no longer all in the living room.
Correct. It was nice to be right.
Yeah. So I asked Nate along today to basically help demystify some of the wording that you see on American whiskey labels. I know for me, when I first started getting into this category, being more of a Scotch drinker, I was like, well, this one says straight, this one says bottled and bond, this one, what does this actually mean? So we're gonna pick the brains of the man himself and hopefully help you choose the perfect bottle for you next time you're thinking of investing in a bourbon, rye, or other American whiskey. So, first of all, the one that I see probably most on the bottles that we have here is straight. Can you explain to me what that means?
Sure. Bourbon, when it's under 4 years old, has to have an age statement on it. So you can have bourbon that's 30 seconds, as long as it says 30-second whiskey on there. It's not very good though, I tried it. Straight is a designation that means basically it's from a single state. So you can have Kentucky straight bourbon, you can have New York straight bourbon, California straight bourbon. The other part of it is it has to be at least 2 years old. With bourbon, there tends to be a lot of blending interstate. That's not a bad thing. Blending's sort of been considered a dirty word in the past, but today people are getting very creative.
You said at the beginning there it can be under 4 years, but has to have an age statement on it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Correct. So Generally people won't have a straight 3-year-old bourbon.
Yeah.
If they do, it'll be on the back in very small writing.
Okay. Good to know, the tips of the trade. And then the other one that I see a lot is this bottled and bond.
This is one of my favorite ones relative to a couple of things. One, it has to be 4 years old. So if you see Kentucky straight, bottled and bond, that means it is 100% 4 years old. So the bottled and bond will overrule it. It has to be single distillery rather than just single state. And my favorite part is it has to be a single distillation season. So a distillation season is from January to June or July to December. So the grain has to be distilled either side of 31 June, pretty much. What this does, it means that you can't hide whiskey from a different season in there. So maybe your product wasn't that great at 4 years old and you wanted to beef it up with some 10-year-old whiskey. You can't do that. You can't hide bad whiskey in bottled and bond. When you're not making bottled and bond, it's not a bad thing to be blending like that at all. It's just I think it's a really interesting expression of a time and place and a distillery.
It's like a very true kind of
representation. It's pretty purist.
Yeah.
Not all bottled and bond whiskey is good, but it all serves a purpose.
Yeah. And then another one is small batch.
This is a funny one. There's no legal definition around it. The line I've heard used to describe this is bourbon is 51% corn, 49% bullshit. So look, there's a lot of marketing going around. Small batch is a word that's used to make it feel more crafty, to feel more hands-on. It's not a negative thing by any means. I think
there's a lot of good whiskey that has small batch on the label.
100%.
But it just doesn't actually really tell you anything about what's in the bottle.
That's it. I think some people's definition of small batch could be blending 50 barrels of bourbon together. Some could be blending 500. It's all relative to the distillery, and to be honest, look, if you're paying over 60, 70 Australian or 50 US for a bottle, small batch generally means it's going to be a bit better.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because that's one that's I've always been a bit unsure if that had a specific meaning. So thank you for unraveling that for me. And then obviously I have done a video, which you can watch up here if you haven't seen before, on how there are the different styles of American whiskey. Obviously, everybody kind of knows bourbon and rye, but America also makes single malt and so on. And the one that's always a little bit of a curly one I find is the sort of like Tennessee whiskey sour mash thing, and whether or not that is actually bourbon, whether it's something totally different to bourbon. Can you
of course.
cast some light?
We'll start with sour mash. Sour mash is just a process to regulate the pH level of your beer before you distill to give the yeast a healthy environment. 95% of all American whiskey is sour mash, generally.
Right.
Bourbon, rye, sweet mash, not many people do it. It's hard to be consistent. So all the labels you see on the shelf generally are sour mash. When it's used on a bottle, again, you've got to start asking questions. Does it say bourbon on there? Or are they insinuating? There's no sort of legal definition around sour mash either, like small batch. So you want to look for the words bourbon and whiskey if you see the word sour mash. Or they're doing something funny, or they're doing something innovative,
Yeah.
and they just can't put it under bourbon.
Yeah.
For things like Tennessee whiskey, that's a funny one. I think legally Jack could be considered bourbon, but it's a part of their identity. There is an argument, which you've probably heard, and I'm sure the comment section will bring it up. For bourbon, it has to be made with brand new American oak every single time. Jack Daniels uses something called, and other Tennessee distilleries, use something called the Lincoln County process. After they've distilled and aged the whiskey, they filter it through sugar, maple, charcoal. Now that charcoal isn't made from American oak, it's made from sugar maple. So there is an argument there that because it adjusts the flavor, it's considered an additive. It's more of a filtering element, but it doesn't matter anyway, because Jack Daniels just called himself a Tennessee whiskey, but there'd be no legal implications for them writing the word bourbon on the bottom.
And you know, we do always love a little bit of controversy in the comment section, so obviously feel free to mouth off around whether or not you reckon Jack Daniels is a bourbon below. And then I guess last but not least is, you know, so this one, obviously we do have a Jack up here, which obviously says Tennessee whiskey, but it also says single barrel select, which is another thing that you often see on whiskey bottles. So what exactly does that mean? I mean, kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah, pretty much. It's single barrels are a pretty new thing in bourbon. I mean, they're not new, but the marketing of them is quite new, I suppose. I think the 80s was the first single barrel out from a major brand. Single barrel select just means that someone had a hand in picking it, generally. However, this one, I don't think any punter or drinker has picked that. I think that's a marketing thing there. Why is it cool? I think it's just a variation. It's brands work really, really hard to stay consistent. Sometimes, though, there is just that magic barrel, and you don't want to blend it in as a blender or a distiller. You want to let that shine. So you put it aside and you bottle it up and you slap single barrel on the front.
Yeah. And so I guess that can be, you know, whereas, yeah, generally speaking, especially with bigger brands like Jack Daniels, you do know what you're buying every single time. Single barrels is where you'll see a little bit of variation and can maybe see even like some different distillery characters than what you might expect in there, which is pretty cool. So if you are, you know, an avid fan of a certain distillery and you generally drink their sort of usual expression that they put out, maybe a nice little treat for yourself could be trying to find a single barrel from them and seeing what you reckon about that.
100%. I think that the variation isn't crazy huge. The identity is still a part of it, the distillery identity. So it still tastes like Jack. It just might be a little more textural or a little more spicy or a little more sweet or, God forbid, with Jack, even more banana. Yeah, it's
Look,
good though.
we love a bit of banana.
We do.
We love our Jack. Now, I guess kind of just to wrap up, if someone is watching this and, you know, obviously we've kind of gone through everything, but almost like in what order of importance would you put it? Like if they're going into a bottle shop and they want to try something nice, maybe spending a little bit more than usual on a bottle, what would you say is definitely the main one to sort of focus in on if you see that on a label?
Sure. My favorite thing about American whiskey is the idea of intention. You can't randomly put things in casks and pull them out.
Yeah.
You have to have an idea of what it's going to be in the bottle before you even distill it, which is interesting. How that translates to purchasing a bottle, generally the price is pretty reflective with American whiskey. I'd say maybe 70-80% of the time. I don't think there's an importance as an individual. Bottled and Bond really resonates with me. I really like single barrels. I really like cask strength single barrels. I really like finished bourbon. It's pretty much down to you and what resonates with you.
It's your individual palate. Well, there we have it. So American whiskey, demystifying the labels on your bottles. Do you want to say it? Are you going to do it in my accent, the way that you do when you're making fun of me?
So now you know.